apologies that you cannot see me, but we'll go ahead and get started. I know hopefully more folks will join, but my name is Kimberly Stephan Tate. I work at Asurion. It is a global 23,000 plus person technology company based out of Nashville, but we are global and have a physical presence in multiple countries and all across the United States. And I am a director of talent attraction and outreach. And I have a specific lens around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the journey that Asurion has been on with diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is something we hear the word diversity and inclusion a lot, and a lot of companies have had diversity and inclusion departments for a long time. They haven't necessarily been incredibly impactful. And a lot of us have been learning over the last few years about how to really level up our diversity, equity, and inclusion programming to be truly more inclusive and to really create environments where people can bring their whole selves to work. And this is definitely something that is a journey. It's not something that companies can just do overnight, just change their corporate culture. So we started back in 2014. Asurion is a privately owned company. And we initially started having conversations about, hey, we probably need to think more about what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like at our company. So the first thing that happened was some women got together and came up with some ideas around improvements we could make for our benefits. And they partnered with our benefits department, and we ended up improving our Mother's Day rooms and creating maternity parking, which had not existed before. In 2015, we launched WIN, which is Women's Initiative Network. That's where a lot of women came together and really started doing some more formal professional development and thinking about all the different things they might need to help them be more successful in their career. It wasn't yet a formal employee resource group, but more of an unsponsored group of some executive women getting together. And then towards the end of 2015, we improved our maternity leave policy. By the time we got to 2016, we had started doing some VP plus bias training. It was really important to us early on that we taught everybody, including our executives, that bias is something that everybody has. Even if you're underrepresented, you still have bias. And so we did a lot of training with our VP plus population to make sure they understood how bias shows up in the workplace. We began starting to look at our LGBTQ plus policies, and we did our very first Pride Walk in Nashville, which was great. In 2017, we created Community, which there's a place for you at Asurion for everyone. And that included the formation of 4 employee resource groups. We initially started small because we wanted to grow these groups organically. We wanted to make sure we had the right structure, the right policies and procedures. And we started out with the Women's Initiative Network. We formalized them, made sure they had an executive sponsor. We started Pride, our LGBTQ plus group. We also started our Veteran Service Group and BEST, or Black Employees Supporting Talent. We started doing a lot more formal leadership training with our teams. We began offering maternity concierge to anybody who was looking at having children. We launched our Be Bold Award Luncheon, and basically we started a formal award process where anytime we caught someone doing amazing work when it came to inclusivity, being a great, supporter of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we would have annual awards that we would give away. And then in 2017, we formalized a Department of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the company. By the time we got to 2018, we expanded our ERGs to include 6 more. We added a young professionals. We added an experienced professional. We added some more race, ethnic-based employee resource groups, including Mosaic, or a multicultural ERG. We added HOLA, a Hispanic Latin ERG. Excuse me. We added HOPE, which is around employees who have disabilities or family members that have disabilities. And we started site chapters. So we started adding the opportunity for our satellite sites to have their own employee resource group chapters. We started B-Bowl breakfasts, which were a lot of fun, but very thought-provoking. Essentially, what we would do is find a topic that nobody really, like, people were afraid to talk about, and we tackled talking about it. So for example, we had our veteran service group and our best or Black employee supporting talent come together to do a whole conversation around Take a Knee. And the point is not to change each other's mind, but rather just to hear where other people are coming from if people think differently than you. So you sit at a table with a group of 5 or 6 people. You get asked questions. Why do you believe in taking a knee? Why don't you believe in taking a knee? And again, the point is not to change people's minds, but rather just to listen and to hear someone else's point of view, and to be okay with listening to someone else's point of view without feeling like you need to change their mind. So we also created Be Bold Film Club. So we found really thought-provoking films that highlighted diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, and we started doing film clubs. We'd get together, sometimes 20, 30, 40 people. We'd all watch the movie in advance, and then in the afternoon, we would come together and talk through the movie and ask ourselves a bunch of questions around the movie and what it meant to us and what we learned from it. We also expanded our Pride footprint. We started doing Pride across the country as well as in the Philippines. We have a very strong LGBTQ population with our Philippine employees. And that walk ended up being absolutely huge, as well as several walks across the US, including Nashville, Las Vegas, Houston, Orlando, Phoenix, and some others. We also launched our very first transgender guide. It's basically a guide that would help leaders to think about how they might successfully help partner with anybody who approaches them and says, hey, I'd really like to come out at work as transgender. Everything from HR policies, procedures to how to cadence the messaging to your team, how to make sure that your team is supportive and that the employee has everything they need to be set up for success. We also launched LGBTQ Active Ally Training. It's a 90-minute immersive training where we teach people about everything from vocabulary to workplace scenarios that they might incur. We talk about demystifying the difference between sexual orientation, sexual expression, and your gender identity. And that training really, we created it in such a way that it's really thought-provoking. We ask people to think about the privileges that maybe they may not be afforded if they happen to be part of the LGBTQ community. Again, we never force our thoughts on anybody, but rather we just provide education to our employees to help them to understand how being an LGBTQ plus employee might influence them, and teaching people that when you come to work, you do bring your whole self to work, and there's pieces of you that are beyond just the skill set that you bring to the table that you bring with you. So if you've had a terrible experience with a past employer, having been someone who's LGBTQ, how difficult that can be. We also introduced bias pop-up training. We've been training on bias, but we wanted to create something that really gave some examples to people, some real life examples of where bias can pop up. And so this pop-up is a 55-minute training. It gives people examples of bias so that they can start to think about what bias they have, and teaching people how to mitigate bias. We also came up with a new baby guide, and we were able to add 4 headcount to our D&I team. So we were strong and mighty. In 2019, we had those same 10 ERGs, but now we expanded because of having different satellite sites and the different satellite sites joining the different ERGs. We ended up having over 77 different chapters of the various ERGs. We ended up with, of all of our employees, over 4,400 people were opted into at least one employee resource group. We expanded our Be Bold breakfast to beyond Nashville. We formed a global D&I committee. Up till now, most of the work we had done was predominantly focused on the US. And so we gathered together all of our HR representatives and leaders across the globe to have a global D&I committee where we could share best practices. 2017 was also the very first year that we got our Human Rights Campaign Perfect 100 score. So that is the Human Rights Campaign offers a corporate equality index. It looks at what benefits you're offering to people who are LGBTQ. And that was the first year that we got the Perfect 100, which was great. We continued with our annual awards and our luncheon. We launched inclusive leadership training, and we piloted a program with the Precisionist. The Precisionist is a program where you bring on talent that you're working with people who are somewhere on the autism spectrum and finding work for them that is meaningful, things that they can do and be really successful. So we piloted that work as well. And then we're still doing the work. So over the last 4 years, in 2020, we had call to action. So a lot of people are familiar with the social injustice that really became visible around Black Lives Matter, around a lot of people who have lost their lives due to gun violence, due to police brutality. And while America was sort of sitting at home in the midst of the pandemic, a lot of employees stood up and said, enough is enough. It's not enough for you just to have a Department of D&I. You need to do something. Our community, the Black community, is hurting. We need you to do something. We need you to take action. So we developed call to action, and that really has 3 pillars. The first one is we made a multi-million-dollar investment and like a financial investment with the Urban League. We created forums for our Black employees so that they had a safe space to come talk and just be around fellow employees who happen to be Black. We provided them with some leadership guidance so that they just could be heard and talk through the frustration of everything that was happening, and, enough is enough, and talking through Black Lives Matter and what our company could do to be as supportive as humanly possible. And then thirdly, we offered allyship training to folks where folks could come and learn about what they could be doing and like thinking through different ways they could support the Black community and our Black employees. We launched unconscious bias training for Directors Plus. We also introduced diverse slates and panels. So what that means is there's a Harvard Business Review article that says if you only have one woman in your final slate of candidates, she statistically has no chance of getting hired. However, if you have 2 women in your final slate of candidates, her chances, or a woman's chance of getting hired, goes up by 74%. And then conversely, with people of color, if you have 1 person in your final slate, statistically, they have no chance of getting hired. But if you have 2 people of color in your final slate of candidates, you have 194% chance more that someone of color will get hired. And so Asurion made a commitment to diverse slates and to diverse panels. We set some requirements in terms of what we were looking for on the final slate of candidates. And we also set some parameters on what a panel needed to have in terms of its demographic makeup in order to be a successful panel. So for example, on panels, we said there's 3 dimensions of diversity that we want to look at. We want to look at gender, we want to look at race and ethnicity, and we want to look at age group. So think millennial, Gen Z, Gen X. And we said you must have at least 2 different dimensions represented. So if you had a woman on a panel, if you had a Black man on a panel and a white man on a panel, we would consider that diverse because you've got a female representation, you have a person of color on the panel. Again, trying to create panels that remove bias as much as possible. We also launched Ignite and Expand, which is a training program. We launched new Active Ally and Be Bold topics. And we started D&I action planning work streams with our different functions. So someone from D&I would basically partner with different work functions. So there might be a group of 2 or 3 people from HR that are working on their D&I for HR, then 2 or 3 people who are coming from finance to do D&I action planning for the finance group, product, technology, so forth. And then we launched our very first annual report where we were very transparent with our employees about our demographic makeup, what percentage of women we had at the company, how that changed as you went from frontline to executive level rankings, where we stood in terms of having people of color in the organization, where they sat, where they fell out of the organization in different leadership roles. And then also talking about the good things we were doing, the employee resource groups and things like that. In 2021, We added IDEA as our 11th employee resource group. That's Indian descent employees at Asurion. We launched an Asurion mentoring program where any employee could be matched with a mentor. We started offering community info sessions. So if you were new to the company and you really hadn't learned a lot about all of our DE&I efforts, you could come to these community sessions and learn more. We launched Certified Interviewer. Certified Interviewer is a 3-part training course where we teach people about how to successfully interview people using competency-based questions. And so a competency-based question we use competency-based questions because we know that past performance is the best predictor of future success. So a competency-based question might sound something like, tell me about a time you managed a project from start to finish. What was the project? How did you bring the right stakeholders along for the ride or know who to bring along? How did you think about timing and thinking about your timeline? And ultimately, what was the outcome of the project? So teaching people about asking questions like that, and also teaching people what questions not to ask, like, who's your spirit animal, or what's your favorite ice cream, which is no indicator of someone's capacity and ability to do a job well, right? So we talked about competency-based interviewing. We talked about ways in which bias can show up. So for example, when you look at somebody's zip code on a resume, you can have geographical bias. So if somebody lives in a neighborhood that's perceived to be lower income level, that can cause you to create a judgment on that person. If the person's name is male versus female, we know that statistically, both men and women choose men's resumes over women's resumes, which that's shocking to me that even women choose men's resumes over other women. Bias also shows up in what college you attended. Sometimes people have preferences for Ivy League schools. Sometimes people frown on people who attend junior colleges, things like that. And so really just helping people understand that the college that somebody went to is not a predictor of what someone's success capacity is in a job. And then we started D&I Action Planning Council, where we were doing a roll-up to our senior leadership team about all the things we were doing around DE&I, and then leveraging the executive team to help us formulate strategy around DE&I. And then most recently, in 2022, we created a refreshed approach to our ERGs as leaders and creating development opportunities for them. Most of these folks there's only a couple people on the DE&I team. So most of these folks are doing the work off the side of their desk. They're leaders in the organization in some way, and they've signed up to be a lead or a co-lead or to chair a pillar in the different ERGs. So we really wanted it to be a great development opportunity for them. So now all of the executive sponsors that sponsor each one of the ERGs, they actually mentor the lead and the co-lead. We create different opportunities for folks for professional development. We use Pluma, which is an executive coaching program. We allow each of our ERG leaders to go through that program as well. And then we started looking at metrics that matter. And one of the things that took us a long time to get to, just in terms of trying to sift through data and get all of the data talking so that we could really measure this, we went in and looked at our attrition numbers to see how many people we were losing in the company. And we wanted to see, if you're involved in an employee resource group, are you less likely to leave the company? And what we found is that people who were in employee resource groups left the company at 50% lower rates. So if you're in an employee resource group, you are far less likely to leave the organization. So it really spoke volumes about how much employee resource groups really do drive engagement and employee satisfaction, because they have people that they can relate to. And we really strongly encourage people to join employee resource groups that they know nothing about. Allyship is very, very, very important at Asurion. In fact, when people first start at Asurion, we encourage them to join no less than 2 ERGs. We encourage folks to join one ERG that they really, really relate to, and then join one ERG that you know nothing about to learn more. And then we have some additional inclusive leader training that we've rolled out. We now have a diversity, a diversity panel tracking app. So what that means is we've now provided an app to our recruiters and to our hiring managers where they can input the names of potential panelists when they're going to do a job interview. So the panelists, the people who are going to do the interviewing with the hiring manager, we have a tool that you can put the names of people in to see whether or not that panel is diverse. We don't want to divulge any PII or personal information about someone. And so it doesn't reveal what their different demographics are. It just gives you a check mark, yes or no, as to whether or not that panel is indeed diverse. Then in 2022, we also integrated ISEMS, which is a new applicant tracking system. We are still in that process, but there's some enhanced functionality inside of ISEMS that we'll be rolling out soon, one of which is redacting resumes. I mentioned earlier that when you look at a resume, people can have bias when looking at a name. If a name is, if it sounds ethnic versus what you would consider a traditional Caucasian name, you can have bias when you see someone's male or female. You can have bias in address. You can have bias in college. And so we're working with ISEMS on implementing a resume redaction tool so that you can leave off the name of the candidate, the address that they live, and the school that they went to, so you avoid all of that bias up front, which we're very excited about. We also introduced We Love Art at Asurion. So we have a major hub in the Gulch in Nashville, which is fantastic. We love it so much. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. And one of the things we just launched is We Love Art. So we have gone out in the community and curated pieces of art from people who are underrepresented. So specifically, we are looking for artwork that has been created by people who are Latin or Hispanic, people who are Black or African American, people who are LGBTQ, and we showcase their work in our Gulch Hub lobby, so that people can look at the artwork. Hopefully they'll want to purchase the artwork. And then we also improved our EX survey. Thank you so much for the kind words. I appreciate it. We introduced some new verbiage on our EX survey that would just really help us to understand how inclusive our employees felt like we were, and if we're doing a good job on inclusivity. And then when it comes to our future state, we really believe in the power that you can harness by being an ally. So for example, one of the active allies that we have is around our BEST, or our Black employees supporting talent. One of the things we wanted to teach people is it's not enough to not be a racist, right? Like that's not what allyship is. Allyship is not being a racist. Allyship is being an anti-racist. Do you read materials that has been written by Black and African American authors? Do you support local small businesses that are owned by Black and African American people? And so really what we're trying to do is talk more and more about allyship and why it's so important for men to show up to the Women's Initiative Network, why it's so important for Caucasian employees to show up to our OLA and our Mosaic and our BEST ERGs. We also have integrated diversity, equity, and inclusion check-in into our culture and into our quarterly check-ins. So we have mandatory quarterly check-ins that every single people leader should be having with their employee. And what happens is the employee will go in and rate themselves, and then the manager will rate the employee as well. And through that check-in process, part of the questions that are asked are around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what have you done, employee, to further your commitment to inclusion this quarter? Were you involved in an ERG? Did you take any training? So on and so forth. And then the same question is asked of the manager. What did you do to support your employee? How did you help drive inclusivity with this employee? What did you do to support their ability to attend these various trainings, things of that nature? And then we certainly want to make sure equity and inclusion are the norm. So it's not enough just to hire for diversity. That's not the point. That's not what we're doing. What we're really trying to do is make sure that people have a safe place and they feel like they can bring their whole selves to work. And we do have, and we've created some very specific goals. It's common knowledge that you see less women and people of color in director plus roles across corporate America, no matter what company you're working for. And that is for a whole lot of systemic reasons. But at Asurion, we are committed to having women and people of color in our upper executive leadership type roles. And so we do have internal goals that we drive to make sure that we're removing bias and that we are actually staffing our executive level positions with men and people of color. So it's been a long journey. Diversity, equity, inclusion is a journey. And hopefully you learned a little bit about the company. In the chat, I did put a link to jobs at Asurion. So feel free to check out those jobs. And then we've got a couple minutes left. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. I would love to share information about Asurion. You can ask me about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can ask me about jobs at Asurion or just anything about Asurion, generally speaking. So I'll wait and see if any questions come in. So we've got a question here about, are there any stats about what percentage of minorities are rejected compared to the counterpart? That's a really great question. We are in the early stages of this at Asurion specifically. There's definitely industry data out there for sure. One of the reasons that we wanted to integrate ISIMS as our applicant tracking pool is because it does give us different demographic data that helps us to understand where a candidate falls out in the hiring funnel. And so what I mean by that is there's the initial step that a candidate takes by clicking on and looking at jobs at Asurion. And so we want to understand first, what caused someone to click on the link but not actually apply. And then once someone applies, we can go in and look and see which ones did the recruiter go and look at. Then from there, how many did the recruiter send forward to the hiring manager? And then which ones did the hiring manager choose? And then ultimately who was hired? So that's sort of your candidate funnel, if you will. And so we are spending a lot of time now really starting to break apart and analyze all that data so that we understand where in the hiring funnel are women falling out, where in the hiring funnel are people of color falling out, and then analysis on why might that be and what could we do differently. Yep. So Pluma Coaching. Pluma is a third-party company, and basically you have to get nominated by your leader, or you should be an employee who is in a lead position in the ERG, and you're basically nominated for this Pluma Coaching. It's a very comprehensive program that lasts several months. You're partnered with an executive level coach. I was a benefactor of this. I actually got to go through this, and it was super cool. So basically you go through training with the executive coach. You'll do sort of a 360 where you'll send out a questionnaire to anybody that you work with, people executive leaders, people that you work with day to day, your peers, people that you might manage. And it asks you it asks the person tons of questions about your work style. Do you get work done? Perceptions around you and the way that you do work. And then that information shared with your coach. Together with your coach, you create a plan on how you want to level up as a leader or individual contributor at the company. And you continue to work together for several weeks to improve your performance. And then let's see. All right, I was just seeing if there was any more questions in the chat. Okay. So again, I know we've got about 2 minutes left. There is a link in the chat where you can learn more about jobs at Asurion. So I definitely encourage you to go check out the jobs we have available. We have a ton of jobs around technology, product. We have HR jobs, finance jobs. We're always looking for software engineers. So again, I put that link back in the chat. Feel free to check out the different jobs we have at Asurion. Again, we're a 23,000 plus person global tech company. We are based out of Nashville, but we have tons of jobs throughout the country. And we also have a lot of either hybrid roles or 100% remote roles as well. So I encourage you to please go check out the link, go check out the jobs that we have. We do have a booth, an expo booth, where we've got folks that are ready to chat with you if you do have more questions. So feel free to check out that expo room with Asurion and feel free to ask some more questions. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. And I'll stick around for a couple more minutes in case anyone has any last minute questions. Thank you so much.